In direct contradiction to me telling everyone the other day to destroy their phones and get off the internet, I figured I'd make a video that you'd watch on your phones using the internet. Um, the reason I don't get on here very often anymore, there's a variety of reasons, a multitude of reasons. Um, but one of those is I feel as if I've essentially said everything I needed to say that needed to be said. And I only find myself getting on here when I feel like there's something I haven't said that should be said. Because the amount of stress that comes along with making these videos and interacting with the community, not my personal community, but the larger global community, the internet itself, platforms, so on and so forth. It's an immense amount of stress, and so I try to make it worth it when I get on here. And I think you'll be seeing less and less of me, and you'll be seeing less and less of other people, creators, who are coming to the same conclusion I am, which is the entire experiment is a wash. The internet, the social experiment, because it's been essentially completely taken over by um, very powerful vested interests, um, by people who are morally backwards, and so morally forward thinking doesn't have a very long lifespan or reach. But I think it's still important to make these types of videos, put good information out for the few people that will be able to see it before it gets squashed by the algorithm or whatever. So I'll try and make this short and simple. Um, I've thought a lot about this idea that this sort of versus question: are we living in a completely emergent world that is sort of bound to the chaos of billions of individuals thinking in their own way, all with their own sort of idiosyncrasies and moral compasses? Are we dealing with that kind of world, and all the chaos and all the terrible things that are happening are just the result of um, over complexity and our inability to understand that complexity and rein that complexity in, to turn it into, to siphon it into something meaningful for human beings and produce um, essentially the next age, the next stage of humanity? Have we gotten to a point where it's not like, the Renaissance that comes out of the Christian stasis, or you know, the Russian Federation, or the Russianization of the Soviet Union in its collapse, and then the rebirth of the Russian soul, and 1,000 other examples, the collapse of the Bronze Age, and their mini Dark Age, but then what came out of all of that? Um, are we dealing with a situation which is like all of those other situations, except it's so complex and there's so many moving parts that human beings are losing their minds, right? Out of all of those sort of funnel events of the past, they weren't so overwhelming that it ruins where, obviously you're living in the time that you're living in, and you weren't living back then. And you can read history books, but you can never fully grasp what was happening back then. It does feel like this one's different. Um, that it might be too much for us, right? It may be the Fermi paradox, right? Um, we think about nuclear weapons, or advanced technologies like genetic editing and bio warfare, and we think these would be the things that would cut off a civilization, destroy it, or whatever, or some cosmic event that just wipes out a solar system. Maybe, if the Fermi paradox is a real thing, maybe the most dangerous thing is when our own psyches um, attack us from outside. We've projected our psyches into culture, into language, and now into computers and AI. And now it's almost like it's because we projected a lot of the not good stuff onto it, it's coming back to bite us in a way that we are overwhelmed by. And not just overwhelmed some individuals, the entire global community is being overwhelmed by. Okay, so that's one scenario of the verses. This is all emergent. This is all, the issues are issues of chaos and complexity. The other side of that is the eschatological side, right? This idea that everything's part of a grand design and a grand plan for the betterment of humanity. And that grand plan is guided by some sort of super intelligence or supernatural or higher consciousness entity. And you can see across the spectrum that there's tons of different versions of the skins of this ideology, whether it's the return of Christ or Galactic Federation or whatever have you, human beings from the future, And, I've always sort of at least played with these ideas, and many times in my life wrestled with them, right? Unsure of like what path to be on. And recently I've just decided to try my best to detach from both paths. You think that logically you default to the emergent chaotic complexity side of the coin, because phenomenologically that one tracks, as opposed to the other one. We have lots of evidence of the supernatural, but we don't have a lot of evidence for a supernatural that is deeply concerned with the human endeavor. Lots of people will debate that, but there's no reason to believe there's a consistent aim. If you look at all the supernatural events and the strange things that have happened through human history, it always seems to be up, down, left, right, reverse of whatever's happening. It seems to be more subversion than coaxing toward a higher principle, a higher way. Anyway, today I was just thinking, let's say there's a grand design. It just is a thought experiment that there is a grand design, that there's some entity guiding us, and that entity is a decent, good entity that's not trying to subvert us. It may be covert and use covert means, and it may use a meta logic that is over our heads that we don't quite understand, that would sometimes make us lean into us thinking we're being screwed with. But let's say it's a good entity and it's just operating on a meta logic that we can't understand, that our logic can't reach. Like, we can't understand how immense suffering might do us good, is a simple example. So I asked myself, if this was one of those divine plans for growth, what would be the win condition? And it would take me hours to show all the little pieces, the moving pieces, but we've discussed this in many other videos. And so if you want to get a better idea of how I came to this conclusion based on everything happening in the world, just check out any one of my, especially just my, update videos where we talk about world events and I compare them back to this idea. So, but if I was to pick a win condition that makes sense now, because this win condition wouldn't have been revealed to me had we not been through the last decade. It would have never occurred to me. It's very complex, as opposed to a more fantasy Disney movie ending, happy endings, be virtuous, this, that, and the third. So with everything that's happened, and if I were to summarize everything that's going on in the last decade, it would be that the whole thing is like a void. It's like an abyss of terror, to be completely honest, right? I think that's a good way to characterize what's happened to us for the last 10 years in this strange information spiritual war that is the undertone of everything else that's happening materially. If still there was a grand plan that was ultimately good for people, I would say that the win condition is to figure out how to be the light, how to be the anchor in that abyss yourself. Not like an I am God type thing, more like I need to not be so reliant on God in an unhealthy way, and that we're being pushed to the absolute extreme to see if one or many of us can figure out how to be the anchor which brings the light of God into the world without themselves having to rely on a crutch. And now this has many fantastic consequences, one of which is the liquidation of all impure ideologies, which is essentially all the ideologies we operate on. No matter how good we might think they are, how good we might perceive them to be, maybe a major religion that ultimately does good and, missionary work and feeds the hungry or whatever it is, we don't really have any system that just produces good without a lot of bad. But let's say we did, it would still be a crutch because we'd be relying on something outside of ourselves that we cannot prove, that we use as a sort of literary or linguistic device in order to keep us going. And what we see in the world right now is a complete meltdown of everything we've ever known, everything we've ever relied on, whether that be government or religion or any moral philosophy. It's all melting down, whether it's the ideology itself not waxing with the emergent zeitgeist of everything, humanity, culture, or it's realizing that all the officials, all the people who basically are the vanguards of these ideologies are all turning out to be not really great characters, which calls into question the entire ideology and the system and the bureaucracy attached to it. And so when you don't have any of those things, the ideology also falls apart. Our confidence in all of our institutions is dissolving. And now that's a good thing. And a decade, 2 decades ago, I predicted this would happen. I hoped this would happen because we need a real ideology that's common sense, that works because we're humans and because we're built a certain way, and it serves all the needs of the people. Our institutions don't serve the needs of the people by and large, by humanity. It serves a different beast, a sort of invisible one, but then also benefits those who are able to take the reins of that beast, but at the expense of the majority of the population, right? The many. And so the needs of the few and the wants of the few outweigh the basic necessities, basic needs of the many. And this is across all institutions. This is destroying us. A lack of a consistent, objective moral philosophy, and I'll debate anybody on whether there's an objective moral philosophy. I'm a moral relativist in the sense that morality isn't a universal, outside the human being, consistent thing that's objective, but there is a consistent human morality based on our biology, based on our psychology, based on the basic needs of human beings, and not just physically, like food, water, shelter, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. There's an objective version of that. And now, and that transcends cultural differences. For instance, if there is a culture that's in contradiction to the basic needs of human beings, then that culture is bullshit, and we need to get rid of it. You know, for example, like the circumcision issue, especially, female, for instance, right? It's part of an ideology that's that it goes against the basic human needs, because of what it does to young women who are not consenting to this, who are receiving extreme pain, trauma, and their physical body is disfigured, right? So that in and of itself comes into direct conflict with a basic human morality system, which says you don't do harm to people against their consent, especially when they're not old enough to even like put together like the implications of what's happening to them and how that's going to affect them. It's the same thing here in America, well, the whole West, where young kids are being brainwashed into being confused about their biological identity, and then being coerced into doing really terrible things to their own body that will later have consequences that they can't even begin to imagine, right? So this is evil, and it would be an evil in this moral philosophy. I'm not trying to get political. This is all real stuff that's really happening in the world, and I'm trying to go on both sides to show examples. So, with all that being said, we need a uniting philosophy. That uniting philosophy is far off because most people are losing their minds and trying to hold on to sand that's slipping through their fingers. And that sand, of course, is all the old ideologies which felt like rocks in the past, like boulders we could hold on to, anchors we could hold on to, but they're disintegrating. But human beings need a way, partially because we're so connected to each other. We need a common dialogue, just like we need a common language, or at least be an ability to translate those languages, but we need a sort of solid foundation. We need the same for a moral philosophy. One of the biggest reasons for the bifurcation or the balkanization of people and their disconnection from each other is the fact that everyone thinks they know best, and everyone thinks the ideology they're operating from is the supreme one, but they're all distorted. They're basically all radical. I mean, you only have to sit in a conversation with somebody on the left or the right to realize that everyone on the left or right is radicalized at this point. Radical. Because there's no reasonable left and there's no reasonable right anymore. And you hear those people talk, and it's like two different species that don't have any sort of connective language trying to talk to each other, right? From a social, cultural level, not from a basic linguistic level. Clearly, they're talking in the same language. But that's where it stops. That's where it ends. With so much balkanization, so much compartmentalization and separation, and a multiplication of ways, we are no longer able to connect with each other on a human level. And we're all basically being hijacked by these parasites, these linguistic parasites, or linguistic viruses. The only remedy to that is to rediscover or discover for the first time a way that satisfies all the basic human needs and then mitigates all the individual wants in such a way that no want or need infringes on the needs of anybody else. And we find out how many wants we can all have, and we find a way where everyone's needs get met. And again, not just physically, not just food, shelter, water, air, that type of thing, but emotional needs, psychological needs, spiritual needs. So if there was Now, this is the interesting thing about human beings, right? Because we can look at it from the angle of this is a divine plan and we're meant to be da 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 da. And we're being guided toward this higher version of ourselves as a species and as individuals. Or we can say that human beings are very resilient, and through chaos, we choose to survive. We choose to rise. It's just like we're one of the only species that ever changed its diet when the food ran out. Lots of animals, most animals, go extinct if their food source disappears, if their habitat gets changed. Most of them just walk off into the abyss. Human beings decided to expand their diet, to migrate vast distances, even into icy plains, and ice fish, and which was probably a brutal existence for generations and generations, but we chose to live. And so the flip side of the coin that is a divine plan is that we construct our own divine plan through chaos, through suffering, because we have this great stubbornness to persist, to exist, to evolve, to change, to grow, and to take all the chances necessary in order to keep the human story alive. So whether it's by divine plan or by divine necessity, the lesson we have to learn, first as individuals who reach the peak of that mountain, and then as the collective who are willing to accept this new treaty, this new testament, this third testament of humanity, is to, in the most absolute terror and lack of being able to know what's going to happen next, without some old ideology to lean on to back up what we're believing in and what we're discovering, we must find the hope that is self-referential to our own will, desire, love, compassion, passion, lucid understanding of justice, that the indomitable spirit of human beings. We have to find that within our individual selves to create something new that works, and not rely on government, not rely on our ideas of God, and do it despite there not being any promises, despite not having a backbone philosophical framework to buffer what we're believing in. We have to do it because it works, and we have to do it because of the will and the spirit to be and to be happy and to spread that happiness and light throughout the world exists within us. Like a grand fire, we have to light the fire ourselves and keep it stoked ourselves and not let other things stoke it, not even other people. We have to be the light for the rest of the world, while also not becoming a false idol, an image of that light. Instead, just Mark or Joe or Jane just happened to be the first person to stumble upon this way that actually works and solves the complex problems that are happening now and bridges us to a new place of relative peace. Now, I'm not talking about a utopia where everything's perfect, but I'm talking about getting out of this dystopia that we're currently in. And that, like I said, not become an idol, not become an image of it, but the way you conduct yourself, that way, that gospel becomes the image. And then people can take that image and try it themselves, and it works. And there's no you may have reverence for the first person that stumbles upon this, and you may give them their due, but that shouldn't become iconoclastic, right? We shouldn't turn anybody into idols. We shouldn't always commemorate that person, and that person is at the head of that new church. We don't want this turning into a new church or a new religion. It's like chivalry. Like, I don't think anybody knows, anybody can say who invented chivalry, right? For one, it was probably many people who built it over time. But we don't worship and idolize that first person and make them the thing. We idolize and worship chivalry itself and the tenets of chivalry. And this is how it should always be with any mode or form. And that mode or form should always be evolving as new needs arise. And new exploits show that it's now been made imperfect by new emergent phenomenon in our reality. So it needs to be this evolving holy book, which doesn't try to capture the imagination through fantasy and embellishing the supernatural, which instead only remains just a pragmatic approach to how to conduct oneself properly in a human, interconnected human world. I could write a book on what that way is, and I'm not saying to be a complete book, but I have a lot of ideas, and I know a lot of other people do too. Our constraint right now is a systemic issue with our institutions and the people in charge of them, and possibly maybe even weirder stuff, right? Bed Bath and Way Beyond type stuff, like aliens and fairies and demons and whatever else, Matrix, right? That are also supporting the tyranny that we see. That's our greatest constraint. Is our people talk about censorship all the time. There's many things that are censored, but there's nothing more censored than a good conversation about how to get us out of this mess. Really think about that. There is nothing more censored, and I'll explain to you, and it'll be a light bulb that goes off in your head if you don't believe me right now. There is nothing more censored than a good, rational, civil conversation between two or more people about how to actually resolve and solve all the issues at hand. How do you know that? When was the last time you saw a video about that? When was the last time you saw a video with two or more people having a rational, civil conversation that cut to the heart of the issues at hand and how to actually practically, reasonably solve and resolve the issues? When was the last time you saw a video like that? I haven't seen any videos like that in decades. I talk about it all the time when it's just me, and I'll conversate sometimes with a few people in the chat that have their bearings straight, but who sees my videos? Not very many people anymore. And so that to me is a pretty clear indication that that's the most suppressed information, is the information that would actually allow people to have civil conversations with people that are not like them necessarily, who even bring bad ideas, but more importantly, unique ideas, which you can sift through and maybe find the gem within the smallest unit of the idea. Maybe a couple of those smallest units work, and then you can merge them with yours, and you can take off you can separate all the chaff from the wheat on your idea, and we can formulate something between cultures, between religions, between different types of people, no matter what their skin color is, or sexuality, or gender, or whatever, blah, 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 and find something that works for everyone. This is not some naive idealist concept. This is a very common sense, reasonable thing. We can conserve cultures, we can conserve borders, we can conserve traditions and songs and histories and opinions that aren't necessarily true, while also creating something of a system that operates through the entire fabric of global society, and economics that works everywhere. Economics is not opinion, right? Um, Security is not opinion. There's things that work and there's things that don't work. There's an economy that would work for the whole world that doesn't consume everything on the planet, that doesn't instigate wars for territory and resources, while also not being state controlled and planned, which is also ridiculous, right? This is a critique of capitalism and communism. They're both shit systems at this point. Not so much because their initial idea on paper isn't good. It's how they've been twisted. It's how they've been misinterpreted. It's how there was failures with the creators of these ideologies. And also, again, the emergent complexity of our reality, which is outgrowing all of our old systems. The good news is that whatever the new economy or new religion or new philosophy is, there's a very pragmatic approach to understand the objective truth, to understand the objective greatest version of the economy, which again will always be changing because it could always be refined to be made better. It can never be perfect. And it'll always need adjustments because there will always be new emergent phenomena and more complexity in our world. So it'll always have to evolve. But we're clearly using something that not only is too old for our world now, it's also full of corruption. And we don't have to go into the details. I mean, anybody who's been on my channel knows my critiques of the economy and the way we use, banking and money and all that. But the solutions are easy because all you have to do is look at all the pains and apply a really basic moral philosophy, an objective, universal for human beings, moral philosophy. So yeah, I think that's, if there's any sort of manifest destiny, win condition, lesson to be learned, it's that as individuals now, because we've become so compartmentalized psychologically, it's our job individually to have the courage to step into the abyss without any attachments and find the light. And now this would be the greatest endeavor that you could undertake, whether there's a spiritual, supernatural endgame, or whether we just need to get out of the trouble that we're in. God bless everyone. Love you.